I'm Jenna Joy Harper, firstborn of 3, raised on cold tiles and louder echoes than lullabies. Mom was 17 in a New Jersey winter, carrying me and carrying shame that wasn't hers to carry. Grandma Ruth ran the house with iron clocks, stiff prayers, and a rulebook that never learned to soften. Dad was a paycheck in a suit and a shut door, the smell of coffee without a cup saved for anyone else. We learned to read weather in silences, counting thunder in the spaces between their breathless pauses. They married after my name was inked late, love absent from the ceremony like sunlight behind heavy blinds. The living room collected arguments like dust. Settling in corners, we stopped pretending we could sweep. Plates spoke first, then voices, then the long night where the hallway turned into a narrow winter road. I held my sister's hand the way a lighthouse holds a ship, steady even when the bulb flickers in salt wind. We slept with one ear open, little animals in a field where hoofbeats meant run, not play. 5 years in, Mom begged the judge for air, and Dad answered with papers sharpened into knives. He kept the house, the car, the insurance, and for the wound to sting deeper, he kept the daughters. We became evidence of his power, trophies polished with custody schedules and clipped weekend smiles. Grandma's spare room became our station, 2 beds and a dresser that swallowed secrets like rain. Dad worked late. Tradition babysat. I learned to look brave in windows that returned my small reflection. Sundays, Mom arrived carrying cookies and apologies, hope trembling like coffee in a paper cup. We pressed our cheeks into her coat and counted the heartbeats we could borrow before goodbye. She promised, "I'll fix this," and promises became ropes we wound around our wrists to keep from drifting. I traced timelines on fogged glass, future arrows aimed at a front door that might open and stay open. We believed like swimmers believe in shore they can't see, tired legs still moving toward the idea of land. 2 winters later, the gavel thawed, and our bodies remembered warmth like a language we once spoke. Mom brought Marcus, soft hands, calloused palms, a laugh that stitched the torn edges of the day. He didn't audition for Dad. He just showed up with tools, pancakes, and a patient ear for monsters. Home became a verb, something we did to each other. Build, repair, paint, plant, and sing. The night finally slept through the night, and the house exhaled the breath it had held for years. We raised a frame from plywood and prayer, a rented dream turning solid under weekend sweat. A backyard maple kept our secrets, leaves applauding each new attempt at ordinary happiness. Stray dogs found us like we were magnetic, and we named them after constellations and candy bars. On Saturdays, Dad's truck smelled like sawdust and cinnamon gum, his pockets jingling with found screws. He always brought chocolate, and somehow he always remembered my favorite piece to save for last. Family Day became our calendar's brightest ink, ferry rides and museum halls where echoes felt friendly. We learned the city's free joys, the way a cheap ice cream cone can save an entire afternoon. Mom laughed with her whole body, and the walls learned the melody of plates set gently on the table. We were not rich, but plenty came from effort. Plenty wore hand-me-down denim and shining, tireless eyes. Safety moved in and hung its coat, and the front door forgot how to slam itself shut. When my baby sister arrived, the house rehung the sun, warm over crib sheets and lullaby breath. We grew into a chorus of 3, braid lines and scraped knees and secrets traded beneath blankets. Grandma softened like butter in warm hands, pretending not to smile while definitely smiling. Report cards turned into fridge art. Mud on shoes became proof of living, not a reason for scolding. Nightmares lost their teeth, retreating down hallways lit by Dad's steady footsteps and quiet checks. Adolescence knocked. I opened with lip gloss and curfews I swore were personal insults from the moon. First crush, first ask to date, first handshake with Marcus measuring courage and respect in equal parts. We dated on the couch under parental weather, a forecast of chaperoned laughter and early goodnights. He was kind, he was safe, he was the shape of first, and that shape fit until dreams outgrew it. My yes to tomorrow got bigger than his, and the map in my chest started drawing roads west. At 19, a call changed the horizon. Promotion, relocation, a salary with stairs to climb. I phoned my fiancé expecting tandem wings, but he loved the zip code more than our shared flight. Mom said choose the life that chooses you back. Marcus nodded with quiet pride and teary eyes. I packed 2 suitcases and an unfinished prayer, promising to write, promising to become who I could be. On the bus to the airport, I kissed my fear on the forehead and told her to sit by the window and watch. Curitiba became Columbus, then Denver, then Seattle in this retelling. The point is far from home. Office fluorescents baptized me in ambition. I learned keyboards like pianos and targets like hymns. In night classes, I sat front row, volunteer notes sharp as spines, answers ready to be useful. He walked in late with storm hair and a grin that stapled itself to trouble and charm. He was the kind of boy who smoked limits, who waved at consequences like old drinking buddies. I called him about a class trip. He joked. The joke stayed, trying on meanings in my head. Soon he sat beside me, his notebook empty, my margins crowded with rescues and reminders. I didn't love the bar across the street, but I learned to stand in its noise and not flinch. 2 months and 1,000 almosts later, we kissed under a sagging string of patio lights. He moved in like weather, a forecast I didn't check, a daring I mistook for destiny. We collided lives, his music loud, my mornings early, his nights drunk on stories and actual drinks. I kept rearranging myself to fit his furniture, scooting my boundaries to the apartment walls. He changed jobs the way some change playlists. Bored at track 3, hunting track 4 with new bass. I told myself he was finding himself, and maybe I was losing me in the same brave sentence. We declared it love because the word arrived first, and the evidence arrived late and breathless. A transfer pulled us back to the East Coast, Newark skylines and salt air tangled with old ghosts. He came without employment. I came with a title that startled my own reflection in the elevator. He tried a role, tried the commute, tried to outrun the mirror in the train window and failed. 3 months later, he quit, and the couch learned his weight like a second geography of avoidance. Days drank him. Nights demanded me. Our fights learned new choreography. Short, sharp, repeating. He said I worked too hard, that my eyes belonged to him, not to dreams that stayed after midnight. I said I could be both, but the word both is heavy when someone keeps hiding one half. He offered an ultimatum wrapped in a whimper. Go back or go on without me. Choose him or wings. I chose him, or maybe I chose mercy, telling myself rescue is love when it is also surrender. We moved back, and I sold the furniture of a life I hadn't finished learning to love. His mother's spare room became our awkward landing, pride limping in behind borrowed sheets and whispers. A late rent check of fate turned pink, pregnant, planned in talk, sudden in heartbeat, terrifying in joy. I cried in the parking lot, both hands on the tiny future buckled invisible into my chest. He smiled big for photos, smaller at night, the edges of his grin stained with unfinished promises. We found a small apartment near his mother, a place to frame the word family in fresh ink. Our son arrived on his father's birthday, 2 names braided around one candle we couldn't keep lit. Hospitals smell like hope and bleach. I learned both intimately while kissing a forehead into existence. He celebrated loudly, then drifted quickly, as if fatherhood were a party with a too early last call. The baby taught me a new clock, one that forgives nothing and loves you for trying anyway. He accused me of loving feedings more than him, and I didn't know how to be 2 women at once. I returned from maternity leave carrying a new badge and an older spine, promoted into bright responsibility. He joined the same company on the factory floor, our lunches passing like ships in fluorescent seas. Money evened, then tilted. I became provider by math, not by manifesto, and I wore it quietly. He drank more often, more carelessly, driving home with bravado where the law should have ridden shotgun. I learned the emergency calm of a mother, the argument filed under safety, the keys wrestled for mercy. The cops came once. I learned the taste of metal from words I couldn't swallow back down. I started to skip gatherings because laughter never felt safe when it had wheels and goodbyes. Shame made a small apartment in my lungs. I couldn't tell my mother that joy could bruise. Instead, I ran, first down the block, then toward a finish line I could tape across my own chest. Running became confession. Sweat wrote psalms my mouth was too frightened or proud to say aloud. From running to swimming to cycling, triathlon stitched me back where the seams had frayed. He cheered when he felt like it. Mostly he mocked the price of bikes and the cost of joy. Still, training made me breathe like a person again. The mirror started to recognize my eyes. He lost another job. The bottle found him on purpose. I found the road before dawn on purpose, too. Between us sat a table with a single crumb of companionship, and I kept pretending it was bread. December carried me like a fragile ornament, hope rattling inside its glass with each hard step. I dreamed San Silvestre by another name, a race that meant I still belonged to my own feet. We planned the logistics like truce talks. He said yes. He said proud. He said he'd hold the fort. I left the beach house to catch a flight, my family still sand-dusted and loud with kindness. A call at dawn carved the sky. Come back. Something happened. Bring your bravery and don't bring questions. I found Mom with a trembling door and a trembling voice. He'd shoved words, then shoulders, past her guard. My son arranged toy cars like barricades, order in plastic where the adults had none to spare. He sat by the pool slurring apologies no one could hear over the sound of broken trust. I skipped New Year's and learned how one night can drag the entire calendar down a staircase. The word never again moved into my mouth, paying rent in vows I wasn't ready to collect. After that, he fought louder when drunk, like rage finally found the password to our Wi-Fi. I shrank my voice to keep our boy's memory intact, a mother bird swallowing glass for the nest. He called my training selfish, my friendship suspect, my victories frivolous expenses we couldn't afford. I checked my joy at the door like a wet umbrella, dripping alone in a corner nobody tended. Still, I raced and qualified for a dream abroad, a bright stamp in a passport I hid under sweaters. He met that miracle with cold water and calculator math, with questions that sounded like insults with ties. I smiled for my coach and cried in the laundry. Salt a language clothes learned too quickly. Christmas came with absence wrapped in silence. He left on the 23rd with a duffel and no goodbye. I begged the universe to spare our son from explanations his mouth wasn't old enough to form. We spent the holiday on a borrowed couch, practicing gratitude like a muscle-lifting grief. New Year's found me praying for a reset button I could press without erasing my child's firsts. He returned days later with flowers that smelled like apology and convenience, not remorse. I let him in because winter is long, and the crib is small, and hope is stubborn. He promised to try, and I promised to pretend that trying was the same as changing. January bowed its head. We trained our faces to pass for peace in photographs. 3 weeks before the flight, a work barbecue became his alibi with cologne and careless laughter. Midnight turned to 2, to 3, to the kind of 4 that stains a clock's reputation. He stumbled home and peeled off his clothes, leaving a breadcrumb trail of intentions to the spare room. His phone shivered on the bathroom tile, buzzing like a trapped wasp demanding to be freed. I picked it up to stop the noise and read a text that pulled the floor from under my breath. She wrote in the grammar of afterglow, praising his hands, asking for tomorrow, borrowing my future's name. I sat on the bath mat and cried without hiding, grief heaving like a tide that didn't believe in land. He slept like guilt had no teeth, his mouth open to a ceiling that forgave him too easily. Morning brought denial dressed as outrage. How dare you touch my privacy while I touch your life? I showed him the screen. His lies scrambled, then knelt, then promised a rehab that never called back. We traveled to Europe with tape over the crack, smiling where strangers took our picture seriously. For 6 days, we found the soft versions of ourselves and fed them pastries and late walks. I raced like a woman carrying glass, but refusing to drop the pieces history said were hers to bleed. He was lovely in public, and almost gentle in private, a counterfeit Bill that still bought candy. We flew home with jet lag and a fragile truce, the kind you whisper to keep from waking fear. 1 week later, he went to the store for an hour that stretched its limbs into something else. He returned with empty hands, and a phone he suddenly guarded like a secret passport. I watched the screen light with the same name, her vowels familiar as a bruise you keep touching. At a family party, I wore a smile that ached, counting minutes until honesty had a room. That night, I told him we were done. He cried expertly and promised history would never repeat itself again. I held the door open for his leaving and felt relief move in, tired but determined to pay rent. Week 1 shattered. Week 2 staggered. Week 3 steadied enough that I could manage a grocery list. His grandmother called to bless betrayal as biology. I declined the inheritance with a steady voice. I booked a massage to coax my muscles into forgiving my mind for making them carry so much. The therapist felt my belly and asked about cycles. I bought a test and watched 2 lines become a siren, positive in every language my hands could hold, a chorus of pink that tuned my future overnight. I sat on the bathroom floor where I'd mourned before, now weeping into the bright mouth of a miracle. I was alone and not alone, terrified and chosen, ashamed of caring about anyone's opinion but life's. A blood test confirmed what fate had already embroidered on my tongue. I was carrying our second child. I called him. He arrived with boredom, the way people arrive to meetings when they hate the agenda. He asked what I planned to do, as if love were a multiple-choice test graded on a curve. I said I would carry, and he said we can try, and I heard the lowercase like an insult. 9 months stretched across a field of humiliation, his absence a fence I kept begging to turn into a gate. He vanished for days, returned with whiskey breath, and scattered words designed to bruise without leaving proof. "You're getting soft, getting slow," he said, and I learned how to shrink without losing the child. We opened a small business he managed while I financed, calling it partnership like a spell for trust. Invoices blurred into withdrawals that smelled like perfume I didn't own, and receipts I never saw. A GPS ping on the truck I insured drew a red line to a neon door I couldn't unsee. I handed my sister bedtime and rage, then followed the blinking dot into a room with velvet shadows. He didn't notice me watching him buy time from a woman whose time he'd already stolen from me. I swallowed the scream to keep our son asleep, and that silence burned a brand into my ribs. Dad, my real dad, the one who chose me, offered war. I begged for a victory I could own. I stayed, 6 months pregnant, and bargaining with a mirror that kept asking for a braver answer. At 8 months, a crash called me at 2:30 a.m., the hospital speaking in clipped syllables and fluorescent grief. They handed me his clothes in a plastic bag, and for 1 second relief dressed up as mercy and lied. He survived with stitches and a fracture, and I survived with a text from her lighting up his phone. She'd dropped him at the ER, and I learned the shape of final humiliation. Witness, not rumor. I changed his bandages in my mind, rehearsing the sentence that would end the longest storm. When he could stand without leaning, I told him I wouldn't kneel again for a love that spit. He answered with scarcity and threats. No one will want you with 2 kids. And fear shook but didn't win. Our second son arrived in May, perfect and loud. A sun rising where the forecast swore only rain. The house learned a new schedule, and I learned to tuck grief behind lullabies without smothering either. By December, we rented a month of ocean to practice peace, and he acted gentle enough to confuse hope. It was the last breadcrumb, the final trick of hunger. The pretty lie crumbs tell to starving hands. We drove home in January, and the old darkness waited on the porch, certain I'd unlock the door again. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan and the pulse in Jenna's neck. She was 8 months pregnant when the phone rang at 2:30 a.m., the sound slicing through her chest. A hospital voice trembled on the other end, asking her to come. "He's been in an accident." Barefoot, swollen, she drove through empty streets, her body shaking with fear and fury. Inside the hospital, a nurse handed her a plastic bag with his clothes, soaked, torn, smelling of perfume. For a moment, Jenna thought he was dead, and in that breath between horror and relief, she realized something cruel. She was relieved. Relieved that maybe the pain would finally end without her needing to choose. But then the nurse whispered, "He's alive. He's in surgery." And her heart cracked open again, confused by love and shame. She sat in the waiting room, one hand on her belly, one gripping that bag like a confession. The TV played carnival parades, people laughing, dancing, the opposite of her world collapsing. Then, from inside the bag, his phone began to buzz. It vibrated once, twice, a third time, and her shaking hand reached for it. A message lit the screen like lightning in the dark. "I'm sorry I didn't stay with you. I hope you're okay, my love. I'm fine." Her breath froze. Her skin burned. The words blurred as she understood what they meant. The woman who left him there. The woman calling him love. The crash wasn't random. He'd been with her. Jenna sat on the cold hospital chair, sobbing without sound. Her belly moved. Life inside her. Pain outside. And for the first time, she whispered, "I can't do this anymore." But when he woke up, she still held his hand, because even broken women still hope. He came home stitched and swollen, looking fragile, smelling of guilt. She bathed him, fed him, changed his bandages, a nurse of her own destruction. He thanked her, said he was sorry, promised the same hollow tomorrows. And she nodded, too tired to fight, too pregnant to run. The house felt like a grave where love had been buried alive. Nights became rituals of silence. He'd sleep turned away. She'd stare at the ceiling, counting his lies like sheep. Her belly grew, but so did the distance. Every kick of the baby reminded her of how much she'd lost. Every heartbeat was a question. Why am I still here? One morning, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were empty. Her smile had fled months ago. He'd stolen her laughter with every insult. Every, "You're nothing without me." Even her reflection seemed afraid to meet her gaze. She wasn't living anymore, just existing. Then came the cruelest words, whispered over breakfast. "Who would want you now? You're fat. You're used. No one wants a woman with 2 kids." He said it so calmly, as if describing the weather, and she smiled faintly, because something inside her had snapped. The fear was gone. Only ashes remained. That day, she began to plan her escape in silence. Not with suitcases, not with words, but with resolve. She would survive, not because he deserved it, but because her children did, and because one day, she wanted to look in the mirror and see herself again, the woman who used to dream. The baby was born under a gray sky, the storm matching her heartbeat. He wasn't there when she went into labor. He was busy with work. She held her newborn alone, whispering promises of safety, of love without fear. When he finally arrived, he kissed her forehead like a stranger. It was the final act of a story already over. Weeks later, he disappeared again. 3 days gone, no calls, no excuses. Her body still healing, her mind unraveling. When he came back, she didn't ask where he'd been. She just looked at him with a quiet that terrified him, because silence can be louder than any scream. Her therapist would later call it the turning point. But that day, it was just exhaustion. She didn't cry when he left the room. She didn't beg him to stay. She simply closed the door and sat on the floor, breathing. Freedom sometimes starts with a single breath. He tried to break her one last time, throwing cruel words like knives. "You can't live without me. No one will ever want you." But she looked up and said softly, "Watch me." And it was the calmest, most dangerous thing she'd ever said, because this time, she meant it. That night, he left, and didn't come back. No shouting, no fight, just an ending. Jenna lay in bed, holding her baby, feeling the first taste of peace. Her tears weren't pain anymore. They were relief, the beginning of her freedom. The house was quieter now. No shouting, no footsteps pacing the floor. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft breathing of her children at dawn. Jenna moved through rooms like someone relearning gravity. Steady, unsure, lighter. Every corner still smelled of him, but the air was beginning to forgive. Freedom didn't roar. It whispered. She stopped explaining, stopped apologizing. Her mornings became small rituals. Coffee, sunlight, a deep breath that belonged only to her. Bills, bottles, broken promises. She sorted them, threw them away, one by one. The walls no longer echoed. They listened. The silence became company, not punishment. Her mother helped with the babies. Marcus fixed the sink. Her sister cooked. Love returned quietly, dressed as family. At night, Jenna cried less, not from pain, but from release. She learned to sleep again, without checking if the door was locked. She started jogging at sunrise, her heartbeat sinking with the sound of new beginnings. Her therapist asked, "Who are you without him?" And she smiled for the first time in months. "I think I'm finding out." She no longer feared being alone. She feared losing herself again. And in that shift, she began to bloom. One day she looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. The woman staring back had scars, yes, but they looked like medals now. She touched her face and whispered, "You made it." And for the first time, she believed it. The silence had become peace. Time passed like sunlight through blinds. Slow, kind, consistent. Her boys grew, laughter filling the spaces where shouting once lived. Jenna returned to work, found her rhythm, found her strength. The company she built from ashes began to breathe again. She was no longer surviving. She was living. She met him at a charity run, a man with calm eyes and the kind of patience that feels like shelter. He didn't rush, didn't push, didn't ask her to be anyone but herself. Their first conversation wasn't about love, but about resilience. He told her he admired how she kept showing up for life. She didn't blush. She breathed easier. Months later, he met her kids and brought laughter, not gifts. He repaired broken toys and read bedtime stories with different voices. There were no promises, just presence, and that was enough. For the first time, love didn't scare her. It felt like coming home to herself. Sometimes she'd wake up afraid it was all temporary, but then he'd pull her close, whispering, "You're safe here." And safety, that word she once thought extinct, became real again. She didn't need fireworks. She needed peace. And peace, at last, was hers. The day she ran her first triathlon again, he waited at the finish line. No champagne, no performance, just open arms and quiet pride. Her sons clapped, her mother cried, and Jenna looked up at the sky, not to ask for more, but to say thank you. Joy had finally returned, in her own name. Years later, when the story is told, people call her strong. She smiles, knowing strength wasn't a gift. It was survival turned into art. She teaches her sons that love should never hurt, that kindness is louder than power. Her scars glow under sunlight. They no longer sting. The past still whispers, but it no longer commands. Sometimes she visits the ocean alone, not to escape, but to remember. The water reminds her of everything she endured and everything she became. She writes in her journal, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become." The wind carries it away like a prayer already answered. Her mother says she laughs like she used to when she was a girl. Marcus says her eyes are lighter now. Her sister calls her a warrior, but Jenna just calls herself alive. She finally knows what peace sounds like. Children giggling in the next room. And she no longer needs to be saved. She learned to save herself. On her wedding day, there are no grand gestures, no borrowed veils, just sunlight, family, and a promise whispered softly. Never again will I shrink for love. He holds her hand, not to lead, but to walk beside her. Her sons hold flowers instead of fears, and joy, true joy, stands tall at the altar. The story ends where it began, with a heartbeat, but this time, it's steady, free, alive. Not the sound of fear, but of healing. Not the weight of pain, but the weight of light. And she finally understands. Even broken hearts can glow.